Now, I had the honor and privilege of serving as a Marine in 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, and 1st Force Reconnaissance Company, along with Don. And I have a lot of friends and family who often ask me, why did you go fight in Iraq? And at the end of the day, you know, we didn't fight for some guy in the White House. We didn't fight for a political party. We fought to make sure that the Marine on my right and my left could come home safely to the families that I knew were waiting on them. And second, we fought for something even more fundamental, this idea of America. The idea of America. A nation that stands for the freedom of lasting, meaningful choices for everyone, everywhere. Now, my journey starts in a small farm in rural West Virginia, where I grew up in poverty. And my parents were awesome. I didn't know we were poor. We lived off the land, grew everything we ate, hunted for meat, all that kind of stuff. Ended up going to the Naval Academy for undergrad degree, and then was commissioned as a Marine Corps officer, where I spent time at 3-1 and then 1st Force Recon. I did a couple tours of combat in Iraq, and where I noticed this kind of really disturbing connection between the desperation that extreme poverty was creating in these areas where we operated, and how that desperation was fueling the growth of a lot of the groups we were fighting, whether it was insurgents or Al-Qaeda or eventually ISIS. And the first time I noticed this connection was very early in the war. I found myself in a fighting hole facing north along Highway 7, which was the main avenue of approach for American forces during the early days of the Iraqi invasion. Now, we had just survived the first major contact in the war in a place called Nasiriyah, the Battle of Nasiriyah, where we'd been ambushed, started taking casualties, and had to push through the city and set up a defensive perimeter north of the city, where we had to dig in and await resupply. Now, southern Iraq at the time was terribly poor. Saddam had been oppressing the populations in the south. There was no access to health care, education for the kids. There was a real hunger problem in these villages. And what had been happening as we moved through the south to take Baghdad, the regular Iraqi army was retreating to make a final stand in Baghdad, while Saddam was pushing his Fedayeen soldiers, these special forces guys, south, and they were going hut to hut in these rural villages, essentially coercing these poor farmers to fight us. They were saying, look, your kids are starving to death. We'll drop off a bag of rice here every couple of weeks if you pick up this weapon and go fight these guys 10 miles south of here. And in the early days of the war, we were fighting these guys by the hundreds and thousands. And that kind of set the stage for this one really catalytic moment that changed my life forever. So we were in our fighting holes north of Nasiriyah, and it was about 4:30 in the morning. I knew as the sun came up, they were going to start shooting at us again. So I got up out of the fighting hole, started walking the lines to check on my guys. And I looked up on the highway, and I saw this little white car racing toward our position from the north. Now, the enemy had just started using suicide bombing tactics where they would pack explosives in the cars and blow themselves up in our position. So I grabbed 3 of my guys. We took off running to stop this car. Finally, the car stopped about 50 meters out. The driver hops out, starts waving his arms frantically and running at me. Well, now I think this guy strapped a bomb to himself. He's going to blow himself up. And so I'm yelling at him in Arabic to get on the ground. He's not listening. And as I lift my weapon, and I think I have to take this guy out, I look behind him, and I see a large black military truck roll up to his little white car. 6 guys in black jump up, run up to the car, and start shooting into the car. So this man stops dead in his tracks, starts screaming, turns around, and starts running back to the car. And that's when I realized this guy was just one of those poor farmers who was trying to escape across our lines of safety with his family because he didn't want to fight. And so I yelled at my guys to take out the Fedayeen, and I ran as fast as I could to try to save this guy's family. But by the time I got there, it was too late. I looked in the passenger side. His wife had been shot, dead. I looked in the back seat. He had a little baby girl in the back who had also been murdered. And he was cradling the body of his little 5 or 6-year-old daughter who'd been shot in the stomach, and she was choking on her own blood as she was trying to breathe. And so for the first time in the war, everything slowed down for me. And I put myself in this guy's shoes. And I thought, you know what? I live in a country with a world of choices. All these freedoms. Where do I want my kids to grow up? What do I want them to have for breakfast? What were this guy's choices when he woke up this morning? He had nothing. He could strap a bomb to himself. He could watch his kids starve to death. He had nothing. And in that moment, I got really, really angry. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that the GPS coordinates of a person's birthplace dictate what choices they have in this world. We shouldn't be the only country that has these kinds of freedoms. We need to extend this to other countries. And that was the beginning of a really powerful awakening in me and a powerful conversation among the guys and I in my unit. You see, we would go out there every night doing these capture, kill, snatch, and grab missions, but the movements kept growing. Al-Qaeda kept growing. And we began to see it's because they were preying on these vulnerable populations in these remote villages that were desperately poor. I mean, think about it. For those of you who have kids, how far would you go to help save your children? And so we thought we got to do something about this. The aid groups couldn't reach these people because it was too dangerous. So we thought, well, let's take knuckleheads like us, operators that know combat. We can combine them with frontline development professionals in like a new hybrid model. And we can embed these teams deep in gray zones in conflict areas where no other NGO can go. And we can live there for 5 to 7 years. We can work with local leaders to eradicate poverty and build what we call resilience corridors to stop the spread of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So that was our idea. So when my time was up in the Marine Corps, I transitioned out. I went to business school to build a company that could do that. And a pretty cool thing happened there. Over 30 of my classmates got involved and helped me build out the model. I had faculty there that provided seed funding, mentorship, and advice. And by the time I graduated in June of 2008, we raised enough money to get started. So I packed my bags and I moved to a remote corner in southwest Kenya to launch the pilot project of what became known as Nuru International, a radical new approach to eradicate extreme poverty in conflict areas to prevent the spread of violent extremist organizations. Now, I lived in these villages for about the next 7.5 years, in these off-the-grid areas, in these gray zones, building and testing this thing to try to get it to work. And I made a lot of mistakes, basically every mistake in the book. But luckily, I had an amazing team. And together we were able to have some incredible impact. We impacted the lives of over 250,000 people, lifting them out of extreme poverty. We built a global team of 230 staff and raised about $60 million to get us there. So it was actually started to work. So about that time, we got some attention back in the U.S. And President Bush and Clinton had started this new program called the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. They were looking for some leaders who were trying to make an impact in the country and in the world. And shockingly, they invited me back to participate in this program. I think they had a quota for a West Virginia boy who was a Marine or something. But to participate in the program, I had to actually move back to the U.S. And I hadn't lived in the U.S. for 15 years. I was always deployed downrange as a Marine, fighting, and then I lived in these villages for Nuru for about 7.5 years. I remember when I came home for this program, I was shocked by what I saw. I did not recognize the country that I left to fight for in 2000. There was this bitter fear and hatred ripping our communities apart. You had this harmful divide that had formed in our political system. People just hated each other. You had media celebrities and politicians that were dehumanizing the other side. It's actually a tactic we use in war. We were falling apart. And I got really sad because all of us had been downrange fighting to protect and preserve the idea of America against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And I began to realize they're not the ones who are going to destroy us. It's going to be us. We're going to lose this country because of us. And then I got really pissed off. I'm like, I didn't watch my buddies pay the ultimate sacrifice just to come home and watch us tear ourselves apart. So I wanted to do something. So I tried to figure out what I could do. I had some mentors and said, hey, you should run for office. And I said, no, that's a terrible idea. There's got to be something better I can do. So I kept looking around, and finally some of the donors who had backed me for about 8 years, they said, hey, look, our country's falling apart. We got kids. We're worried they're not going to have a democracy left to inherit. We watched you as an outsider. You're this crazy guy. You disrupted the aid industry. You didn't know anything about aid, but you disrupted the industry with this new approach that had global impact. Would you as an outsider, again, take a look at the politics industry and see if there's a way to disrupt it, build out a center in our politics, and help our communities heal? So I was intrigued. I spent about 4 months kind of diving in to try to figure out a solution, created this strategy, sent it around to some of my mentors. I had Jim Mattis and John Allen, President Bush, a few people gave me some great feedback on it, said, hey, you should do this. So I put together a 12-month transition plan to leave behind Nuru, my organization, because I'm still really passionate about that mission, to bring that freedom to other people. I wanted to make sure the organization survived. And so in June of 2020, I was able to hand off the reins to the new CEO, and it's crazy. They're actually crushing it now. I think they just had to get rid of me. And then in July, I stood up this new entity called More Perfect Union, a strategy to help heal the divide that's tearing apart our nation. So what is it that we do? When I started looking at the problem set, I looked out across our communities and I saw regular people like us hating on each other and never coming together physically. Think about it. How many times in your life do you go out and meet with somebody that doesn't think like you, doesn't look like you, and has a different background? Not very often, right? We've kind of been sorted into our silos thanks to a lot of things like social media. And then I saw this great untapped asset that I felt like the country was not using. Our brave men and women coming home from our wars overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan who need a new hill to take. As veterans, we need purpose and we need meaning. And what greater hill to take right now than to save American democracy in this moment? So what we do is we have founded a veteran-led movement that's spreading all over the country. And what do these vets do? We recruit top vets and send them to the University of Montana to this training package that we do there to train and equip them with the skills they need to go back to their home states and launch what we call brickyard operations. Brickyards means, it's building the country back brick by brick. It's our version of chapters. So the veteran, why veterans? Veterans are one of the last trusted institutions in the country. We have the power to convene people from the left and the right together in these chapters, in these brickyards, into one place around 3 activities that we do in our chapters. So we do civic education, we do leadership training and development, specifically servant leadership, and we do community service projects. We think it's really important that Americans come together physically again in the same place, to break bread together, have tough conversations together, to get our hands dirty together, helping our communities. By doing this, we can have an opportunity to find common ground. Not even common ground, higher ground. We can remember what it means to be American. We can remember that there's so much more that unites us than divides us. Now, this movement has taken off. We're in 7 states in the country right now. In 2023, we're ramping up to 25 states, and we need your help. We cannot wait for politicians in Washington to solve this problem for us. This is a government of, by, and for the people, and we, the people, have to solve this problem. I'm challenging all of us in this room. We need you guys to become a part of this movement, to step forward and find the brickyard in your state and join it. And if there's not one, we'll help you start one. We're living in this crisis moment right now, and if we don't come together, we're going to lose what we all love. We're going to lose this country. And this beautiful idea of America that the world needs so badly right now is going to disappear. But we can stop it. We can save it together. Join us in this movement at More Perfect Union, and we can create a better country for our kids and our grandkids. Thank you.